The gym was just another part of my daily routine, a place where I could escape the chaos of life. But that day, something unexpected happened. Ryan, my best friend since high school, began to act different. At first, I brushed it off, but as our workouts became more personal and our conversations more intimate, I found myself questioning everything. What I discovered about him and about myself changed my life forever. Before we dive into this emotional story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more compelling and heartfelt stories to you. The gym had always been our sanctuary. Ryan and I had been coming here for years, ever since high school, when we decided that lifting weights and chasing personal records was a better way to spend our time than sitting around doing nothing. It was our place, unspoken, comfortable, and routine. That day wasn't supposed to be any different. I showed up like always, headphones in, ready to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of our workouts. Ryan was already there, stretching near the squat rack. His usual smirk greeted me when I walked in. "Late again?" he teased, standing up and adjusting his baseball cap. "Traffic," I lied, grinning back. It was an excuse he didn't even bother challenging anymore. We started our session like usual, bantering between sets and challenging each other to go heavier, faster, harder. But something about Ryan felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. His jokes were the same, his energy as upbeat as ever. But there was a subtle shift in the way he looked at me. Longer glances, softer smiles. At first, I ignored it. Maybe I was imagining things. After all, Ryan and I were close, the kind of friends who didn't need words to communicate most of the time. But as we moved to the bench press, I caught him staring again, and this time there was no mistaking it. "What?" I asked, half laughing, trying to break the tension. "Nothing," he said quickly, but his voice was quieter than usual. He averted his eyes and grabbed the weights, pretending to focus on his next set. I brushed it off, but the moment stuck with me. The rest of the workout continued, but the atmosphere felt heavier than the weights we were lifting. By the time we were finishing up, the tension between us was almost palpable. As we walked toward the locker room, Ryan broke the silence. "Hey, you free to grab a drink after this?" "Sure," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, though I was still replaying the earlier moment in my head. We found ourselves at a nearby cafe, sitting across from each other with post-workout shakes. Ryan stirred his drink absent-mindedly, his usual chatter replaced with an unusual quietness. "All right," I said, leaning forward. "What's going on?" Ryan looked up, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I wasn't used to. For a moment, he didn't say anything, as if searching for the right words. Then he took a deep breath. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you," he began, his voice steady but laced with hesitation. I blinked, caught off guard. Ryan wasn't usually the type to hesitate. He was confident, bold, the kind of guy who said what was on his mind without thinking twice. "Okay," I said, prompting him to continue. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as if trying to shield himself. "It's just, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About myself. About us." "Us?" I repeated, confused. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yeah. I've been trying to figure out how to say this, and I don't want it to come out wrong, but I think I've been feeling something more than just friendship." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and raw. My mind raced, replaying every interaction we'd ever had, every laugh, every late-night conversation. Had there been signs I missed? "I know this is probably coming out of nowhere," Ryan continued, his voice softer now. "And I get it if you don't feel the same. I couldn't keep pretending like I didn't feel anything." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spinning. This was my best friend, someone I thought I knew inside and out. And yet, in this moment, he was a stranger, vulnerable and raw in a way I'd never seen before. The cafe suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in as I struggled to process what he had just said. The next day, I couldn't shake the weight of Ryan's confession. His words echoed in my mind over and over. I think I've been feeling something more than just friendship. It was like a puzzle I couldn't solve, no matter how many times I replayed the scene in the cafe. I went about my usual routine, but everything felt off. The gym, which had always been a place of comfort and familiarity, now seemed like the last place I wanted to be. I hesitated before heading in, knowing Ryan would probably be there. I wasn't sure I was ready to face him, not yet. When I walked in, he was already at the bench press. He glanced up as I approached, his expression unreadable. For a split second, I thought he might say something about the night before, but he didn't. Instead, he gave me a small nod, like nothing had happened. "Hey," I said, my voice awkward and strained. "Hey," he replied, his tone neutral. We fell into our usual routine, but the air between us was thick with unspoken words. Ryan was quieter than usual, his usual jokes and banter replaced with an almost forced silence. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to act like nothing had changed, but another part of me felt like everything was different now. As we moved through our sets, I caught him stealing glances at me, his eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. I avoided meeting his gaze, focusing on the weights instead. But the tension was impossible to ignore. It wasn't until we were at the pull-up bar that he finally spoke. "About last night," he began, his voice low. I froze, gripping the bar tightly. "What about it?" I asked, though I already knew where this was going. I hope I didn't ruin things between us," he said, his words hesitant. "I meant what I said, but I don't want to lose what we have." I dropped down from the bar, turning to face him. His expression was vulnerable, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. It was strange to see him like this, open, unsure. "You didn't ruin anything," I said, though the words felt like a half-truth. I wasn't expecting it, that's all." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I get it. I know it's a lot to take in." There was a pause, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Then, almost impulsively, I blurted out, "Why now? Why tell me this now?" Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because I couldn't keep pretending. Every time we're here, every time we hang out, it just gets harder to ignore." He met my eyes then, his gaze steady. I had to say something. I couldn't keep lying to myself, or to you. His words hit me harder than I expected. For years, Ryan had been my anchor, the person I turned to when life felt overwhelming. And now, he was pulling me into a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't sure how to handle. As we finished our workout, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in his behavior. The way he stood closer to me, the way his hand brushed against mine as we passed each other weights. They were small gestures, almost imperceptible, but they set my nerves on edge. When we headed to the locker room, the atmosphere shifted again. The usual camaraderie of changing and joking felt distant, replaced by an awkward tension. As I grabbed my bag, Ryan broke the silence. "Look, if you need time, I get it," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I don't want to pressure you, I needed you to know how I feel." I didn't know how to respond. My mind was a mess of conflicting emotions, confusion, curiosity, and something else I couldn't quite name. "Thanks," I said finally, the word feeling inadequate but all I could manage. Ryan gave me a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll see you tomorrow?" "Yeah," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. The next day, I found myself back at the gym, not because I was ready to face Ryan, but because avoiding him only made the questions in my head louder. Each thought circled the same point. What if there's more to this than I want to admit? When I walked in, Ryan was already there, doing squats. His focus was sharp, his body moving with precision, but the usual energy between us was missing. I grabbed a pair of weights and pretended to focus on my warm-up, my mind racing with how I would handle the inevitable interaction. "Hey," he said after a while, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of uncertainty. "Hey," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my heart was pounding. We started working out together, the familiar rhythm of lifting and spotting providing a strange sense of normalcy. For a while, it almost felt like things were back to the way they used to be. But then, during a set of chest presses, Ryan spoke up. "I've been thinking about what I said," he began, his tone measured. "And I get if it made things weird. That's the last thing I wanted." I looked at him, unsure how to respond. His honesty left no room for pretense, and I realized I owed him the same. "It did catch me off guard," I admitted. "But it's not just that. It's complicated." Ryan nodded, setting the weights down. "I figured it might be, but I don't want you to feel like you have to figure it out right away. I needed to be honest, you know?" There it was again. His vulnerability, laid bare for me to see. It was something I wasn't used to, something that made my chest tighten with emotions I couldn't name. As we moved on to the next exercise, the tension between us seemed to ease, replaced by an unspoken understanding. We didn't need to talk about it anymore, at least not right now. For a moment, it was enough just to be there, side by side. But then, as we were finishing up, something unexpected happened. Ryan reached for a water bottle and his hand brushed against mine. It was such a small gesture, something that could easily be dismissed, but the electricity that shot through me was impossible to ignore. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Ryan noticed and quickly pulled his hand back, his face flushing. "Sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's fine," I said, though my voice sounded shaky even to me. The moment passed, but the feeling lingered, leaving me more confused than ever. Was I imagining things, or was there something real in that fleeting touch? In the locker room, the air was thick with unspoken words. Ryan changed quickly, avoiding eye contact, while I found myself stealing glances at him, trying to make sense of the thoughts swirling in my head. As he grabbed his bag, he turned to me, his expression hesitant. "Do you want to grab a coffee or something? We don't have to talk about anything. Just hang out like we used to." I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to spend more time with him outside the gym, but then I nodded, surprising even myself. "Yeah, okay." We ended up at a small cafe a few blocks away, sitting across from each other in the dimly lit space. The conversation started off light. Work, life, the usual banter, but eventually the topic shifted. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Ryan said, his voice steady but soft. "And I know it's a risk, putting this out there, but I don't regret telling you. Even if nothing changes, at least I know I was honest." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, not because they hurt, but because they were so raw, so real. I looked at him, seeing him in a way I never had before, not just as my best friend, but as someone who was willing to risk everything to be true to himself. "I don't know what I feel yet," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But I think I want to figure it out." Ryan's eyes softened, a small smile playing at his lips. "That's all I needed to hear." The days after that cafe conversation were a blur of conflicting emotions. My mind was a maze I couldn't navigate, constantly replaying Ryan's words and the way his hand had lingered near mine as we left. Something was shifting between us, but I couldn't figure out what that meant for me or for us. The gym sessions continued, but they weren't the same. Ryan was more careful now, his jokes fewer and his glances softer. I, on the other hand, felt like I was constantly walking on a tightrope. Every time I caught his eye, my chest tightened, and every accidental touch sent sparks through my body. That week, everything came to a head during an evening workout. It had been a tough day at work, and I arrived at the gym feeling tense and distracted. Ryan was already there, as usual, waiting for me at the pull-up bar. "You look stressed," he said, his tone light but concerned. "Yeah, long day," I replied, trying to shake off the tension. We started the workout in relative silence, but the unspoken tension between us felt heavier than the weights we were lifting. I could feel his eyes on me as I worked through my sets, his gaze filled with something I couldn't quite place. Concern, curiosity, or maybe something deeper. It wasn't until we moved to the boxing area that things took a turn. Ryan had suggested we do some sparring to blow off steam, and I agreed, thinking it might help clear my head. We geared up, gloves on and pads in place, and started trading light jabs and blocks. At first it was just playful, the kind of friendly competition we'd always enjoyed. But as the session went on, the energy shifted. Ryan's movements became more deliberate, his punches landing closer, and I felt my heart race, not from the exercise, but from the intensity in his eyes. "You're holding back," he said, stepping closer. "Am not," I shot back, throwing a punch that he easily dodged. He smirked, the confidence in his expression making my stomach twist. "Then show me what you've got." I swung again, but this time he caught my wrist mid-motion, his grip firm but not forceful. The sudden closeness left me breathless. I could feel the heat radiating from him, his eyes locked onto mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. For a moment, neither of us moved. The noise of the gym faded into the background, and all I could focus on was the way his hand lingered on my wrist, the way his lips parted like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then, as if realizing the weight of the moment, he let go and took a step back. "Sorry," he said, his voice quieter now. "It's fine," I replied quickly, though my pulse was still racing. We finished the session in silence, the atmosphere between us heavier than ever. As we packed up to leave, Ryan broke the silence. "Hey, are you free tomorrow? I wanted to show you something." "What is it?" I asked, curious but hesitant. "You'll see," he said with a small smile, the first genuine one I'd seen from him all evening. The next day, he picked me up and drove us to a secluded trail outside the city. It was a place I hadn't been to before, surrounded by towering trees and the faint sound of a nearby creek. "I come here when I need to think," he said as we started walking. "Figured you could use it too." The path was quiet, the air crisp and filled with the scent of pine. We walked side by side, the tension from the night before still lingering but softened by the peaceful surroundings. As we reached a clearing, Ryan stopped and turned to face me. "I know I've been pushing you," he said, his voice steady, "and I'm sorry if it's been too much. I've spent so much time hiding how I feel, and now that it's out there, I don't know how to pull it back." I swallowed hard, his honesty hitting me like a punch to the gut. "You don't have to pull it back," I said before I could stop myself. His eyes widened slightly, searching mine for confirmation. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, the sound of voices and laughter broke through the quiet. A group of hikers appeared on the trail, cutting through the moment like a knife. The hikers' voices faded into the distance, but the interruption left me standing there, unsure of how to proceed. Ryan's eyes were still fixed on mine, the weight of his unspoken question hanging heavily in the crisp air. What was I going to say? The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure. Ryan shifted his weight, breaking the silence. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," he said softly, his usual confidence replaced with a vulnerability that made my chest ache. But I was tired of running from my thoughts, tired of dancing around the feelings I didn't fully understand. I took a deep breath, looking out at the clearing before finally meeting his gaze. "I don't know what this means yet," I began, my voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "But I know that when you're around, it feels different, like something I can't ignore." His expression softened, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over his features. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said. "I just needed to know if I wasn't imagining this." "You're not," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled the trees around us, and the creek gurgled softly in the background. The world felt still, as if it was holding its breath for us. Ryan took a small step closer, his hand brushing against mine. This time, it wasn't an accident. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the contact linger, my heart racing as the unspoken tension between us grew. "I don't want to push you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't pretend this doesn't mean something to me." His honesty left me breathless. For so long, I had been the one holding back, guarding my feelings behind a wall of confusion and fear. But in that moment, I realized that Ryan wasn't just tearing down my walls. He was helping me see parts of myself I hadn't known existed. "I think I'm scared," I admitted, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "Of what?" he asked gently. "Of losing you, of ruining this," I said, gesturing vaguely between us. "What if we mess it up? What if this changes everything?" Ryan gave a soft laugh, shaking his head. "It already has," he said. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." The weight of his words settled over me, and for the first time I felt a strange sense of calm. He was right. Things had already changed. But maybe change wasn't something to fear. As we started walking back down the trail, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the tension between us remained. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It felt like a new beginning, an unspoken understanding that we were stepping into something unfamiliar together. Later that evening, we found ourselves sitting in my car, parked outside his apartment. Neither of us made a move to leave, the silence between us filled with the kind of anticipation that made my palms sweat. Ryan finally broke the silence. "Thanks for today," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "I didn't know what to expect, but I'm glad we talked." "Me too," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. He hesitated for a moment, then turned to me, his expression more serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, though my heart was already racing. "Do you think you'll regret this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question caught me off guard, but as I looked at him, the answer came easier than I expected. "No," I said firmly. "I think I'd regret not trying more." His lips curved into a small, genuine smile, and for the first time in days, the weight between us seemed to lift. Ryan's hand lingered on mine, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and hesitation. Time seemed to freeze as I realized what was about to happen. My heart raced, but for once, it wasn't fear. It was something closer to clarity. He leaned in slightly, his breath steady but his movement slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the distance between us, meeting him halfway in a kiss that was both terrifying and exhilarating. It wasn't perfect. My nerves made my hands shake, and I could feel the tension in both of us. But it was real. And in that moment, all the doubts, the fears, the questions faded into the background. When we pulled back, Ryan smiled, his hand still resting on mine. "I've been waiting for that," he said softly. "Me too," I admitted, surprising even myself. The drive back home was quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence we'd shared before. It was filled with unspoken promises and the understanding that we were stepping into something new, something neither of us fully understood, but both wanted to explore. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind replayed every moment of the day. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not because I had all the answers, but because I was finally allowing myself to ask the questions. This story reminds us of the courage it takes to step into the unknown, to embrace change, and to follow our hearts even when it's scary. Have you ever taken a leap of faith like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one.